Yeah, and then I'm trying to walk out. Like, ready, and I'm like, oh, when I did one, I just, used like, yeah. I was trying to walk out. I go to the side. Yeah, so I heard the fires that were like, so yeah. It was. And then I was, and I really put the. Yeah. Well, that's like deep. Yeah. Well, it was hard. It's not like I thought that and I thought that and I feel like yeah.
That car. Guys find them.
I feel like that. Yeah, it's fun. So it's not apples, we have like a whole like number. I ended up very yeah. I was really fun. Actually, really like I feel like it was keyboard fun is a little bit temptation. I started like so you know how like yeah, right. I'm just saying I don't because I like how did you take it? So like I do it's worse. I look at the actual oh, see, if we don't, I have a little bottle of that. Like, I'm very confident. I want to wear away, but I have like bigger muscles and the price. I think we have a question. Well, not my experience. I have like this like this yeah, the doctor about this one. When I started to let's talk about Alex. I just didn't one time. It's just no, I tried to go over my sleep. I don't yeah, I would feel like
Oh, what do you do? Also, we can stop.
Whatever you please. Okay.
Hi, everyone. Hello. Is this working? Yeah, there we go. Okay, well, thank you all for being here. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome Dr. Cara Wall-Scheffler here for our invited speaker IBGSA meeting for 2026. So before we begin, I do want to take a moment to recognize all those that made this event possible. So first of all, thank you to the IB department for funding this event, and to the wonderful office staff, and especially Teresa for everything they have done and making this event possible. We certainly could not have pulled it off alone. And thank you to the rest of the invited speaker committee members for working so hard to put this together, to all the grad students who participated during the speaker selection process, and to everyone that participated in our events today. And of course, I would like to thank Cara for making the drive down here to share her research expertise with us. So we're very excited to have you. So Dr. Wall-Scheffler earned her PhD in biological anthropology at the University of Cambridge and is now a professor of biology and co-chair of the Department of Biology at Seattle Pacific University. Her research aims to understand human evolution through a feminist lens, particularly through studying the evolution of human sexual dimorphism as it relates to balancing the pressures of thermoregulation and long-distance locomotion. In addition to publishing numerous scientific research papers that have helped to reshape our understanding of gender roles in hunter-gatherer societies, Dr. Wall-Scheffler has also authored a book entitled The Evolutionary Biology of the Human Pelvis. In addition to research, she also dedicates her time to implementing inclusive pedagogy within the classroom, teaching courses in both human physiology and evolutionary mechanisms. So today, Dr. Wall-Scheffler will be sharing her work with us, will be sharing with us her work on sex-based differences in subsistence strategies. So with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Cara Wall-Scheffler to begin her talk. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. And thank you so much for having me. It's been such a super fun day, and I really appreciate everyone coming and sitting and talking with me for hours and hours about ideas. We've had such a nice time. My hope for now is something similar. I'm going to present some ideas, some ways in which I approach my science. And I'm really hoping that it just sparks conversations and that as we hang out for the rest of the evening, you'll feel comfortable to sort of ask and build on some of the stuff we talk about today. I do have slide numbers on this talk on purpose. So if there's a graph or a topic or something that you want to really ask me about later, just write down or remember in your head the slide number, and then I can go back to it and we can talk as we go. So the way that I think about my job as a scientist is to really consider why we believe what we believe. And as a biological anthropologist, I'm often told that humans require special explanations for characteristics about how we live and have evolved and do business. And if not that we require a special explanation, the way that we do things is unique to only us, and it's that uniqueness that requires a special explanation. So here are some examples. So there was an idea for a period of time that humans, when they move into a running gait, run differently than all other mammals. And so if this is speed and this is the cost to run, then other mammals, when they're running, the relationship between these variables looks like this. And we're going to talk about this a couple more times, so don't be scared. And humans, for whatever reason, well, there was a reason, but mostly because they're special, looks like this. And so, but no one had actually tested that. It was based on a series of hypotheses about how humans breathe, because we walk on 2 legs instead of on 4. And so when I went and tested this idea, it ends up that when humans run, they look like that. And so not that different from other mammals. Something that probably many people have heard, because it filters into lots of parts of life, is that because humans are bipedal and have big brains, human birth is particularly difficult and requires a very special explanation, both for why babies are born at the age that they're born and why female pelvises look the way that they do, because everything about humans is that they are the worst at giving birth. Not true. Not true. It ends up that when you compare placental mammals, humans are totally average. There are placental mammals who give birth to litters and have a pretty easy job, and there are placental mammals like hyenas for whom birth is very difficult, and females die at a disproportional amount. Humans are exactly average. We die at about the same percentage as most other placental mammals die during birth. There is nothing particularly difficult in comparison with how we are placental mammals and other placental mammals. It just ends up being a placental mammal really hard, FYI. There's nothing like really hard about the way that we do this. One of the things that I'm going to talk about today is an additional notion that human sexual dimorphism means that males are providing, hunting on behalf of tiny, helpless females. That's not typical of other mammals for whom the smaller female does nearly all of the hunting and provisioning while raising a litter of juveniles. So there's no particular reason to expect that that should be true of Homo sapiens as well. And that's one of the things I get to talk a little bit about today. So what is it that humans actually do well? What is it that actually makes humans unique, just like all species? Each of you studies something that does something really well. And that is why speciation has acted on it. This is my PhD advisor. I got to talk a lot about advisors today as everyone was chatting. This is my advisor, Robert Foley, and this is the book that sort of put him on the map as one of the top paleoanthropologists in the world. And his argument is that, yes, we do some things uniquely, but so does everyone else, and that's what speciation means. So what is it that we do, and how can we approach this question, this problem? So when I think about this question, I'm really interested in the things that we do every day. And so I call this a steady state. We do it regularly, continually, and all humans have access to the ability to do this. Now, I know that for evolutionary biologists, there are lots of reasons that we think traits emerge or occur, and sometimes it's a really acute, quick, predator avoidance strategy that really only happens once in a while. And those are important things to understand and to learn about. That is not what I study. I study the things that all people all the time do. So if we spend time doing something and we have to do it every day, I think we should be pretty good at it. And what that means is I think that you should be able to do this every day and be healthy, which means not sick. So your parasite load should be manageable, okay? And I think you probably should be able to do this without being really injured. So staying upright, for example, okay? That would be, you should be able to do these things if you're good at them. I also think, and this is my own vantage point, that I don't think it should be wasteful. If you're going to do something every day, all the time, it really shouldn't lead to huge changes in temperature because we're endothermic mammals. And we don't really want a giant delta of temperature. So I think if we're going to be good at something, it shouldn't perturb our thermoregulation too much. I think that we probably should be able to do it for not too much energy. I think we should be able to be pretty energy efficient at this particular task so that we can borrow some of that energy to do other things. And I think we should be able to spend some time doing it, but not all our time, because we have lots of things to do within our 12 hours of daylight, assuming we're sort of at the equator-ish, okay? So I think that to be good at something means that you should stay uninjured, and it shouldn't be particularly physiologically costly. So it ends up that there are a number of things that humans do everywhere in the world, and that for as long as we've had records for things, people do these things pretty well. So here are some examples. People actually have a pretty good navigation system in their hippocampus. And it ends up that we have pretty well-defined and evolved, people argue, architecture for knowing how to get into this room. You guys are all here. You did that. Congratulations, brain. Okay? That's amazing. And you can probably find your way to the toilet, to your home, to someplace else that you want to be. You did that. You remember where your kitchen is. you did that. That is really special, and you should be grateful for it for literally the rest of the day, okay? So we can navigate. We also tell stories. This is something very specific to humans. We tell stories in community. We teach each other information. And this is something that all cultures do. All cultures have a dissemination of knowledge that is shared in the community. And one of the things that we tend to share is how to make and use tools, and to use those tools in a particular way in the environment. One of my favorite parts of the day is listening to how people are designing and creating contraptions for measuring their organisms. That is amazing, and you're sharing that information, you're developing new capturing and analyzing strategies, and that is something that people do everywhere in the world. Everywhere in the world, people do this. So these are some things that people do every day all over the world. What I am really interested in is the steady state universal of walking with loads. And this is interesting to me because everyone does it everywhere in the world, every day. And it compiles both the physiological things, what I think it means to do something well, in addition to the social universals of how people do business in the world. And so you build heat, you have to save energy, you have to do things in a particular time, you can't fall over when you're carrying something in your head, you don't want to drop a kid. This is a real thing that happens, okay? So we have to do it well, and we have to be able to do all of the other things. And those universal things that we do well might help us manage some of these cultural things over here on the right. And so for me, walking with loads serves as really the nexus of a steady state universal that humans should be able to do well as a unique species. So I measure time and energy of people walking with loads, with and without different tools. And this is my offspring. I'm allowed to show her to you because she's somewhat recognizable. But you can see that she's wearing a respirometer mask. So I measure how much oxygen people take in and how much carbon dioxide they produce in a breath by breath way. And you can see that she is modeling, carrying an infant model, a baby on her back using a tool. And I'm gonna measure, not on her because she's under 18, so there are rules. But I normally measure how fast people go, how long they take to do particular tasks, can they do tasks with this baby on their back, and does it cost energy? How much energy does it cost to do these tasks? Okay, so are people uniquely good at this? They should use it for not very much energy. They should not take too much time. They should be able to do this without tripping and falling. And so this is what I measure. This is this graph right here again. I'm going to show you graphs as we go with a number of different variables. All of these variables are related to what we generally think makes a good walker. So I'm going to introduce them to you, and then you'll see them in various iterations as we go. And we can talk a little bit more about whether or not people are as good of walkers as I'm going to suggest to you. So we still have speed on the x-axis, and on the y-axis we have cost of transport, which is the metabolic cost it takes to go somewhere. And so in evolutionary ecology, we tend to be interested in how an organism gets to the place that it needs to go, to the water, to the food, to the conspecifics. I'm from Seattle, so to Starbucks, wherever it might be. So we're looking at energy to do something. And so we've already talked about running, but walking is exactly the same. And so organisms, humans and non-human mammals, have a curvilinear relationship between speed and the cost to go a given distance. And so this curve has three really important pieces of information to us that tells us something about goodness. First of all, We know that because it's a U-shaped curve, we know that there is going to be a speed at which cost is minimized. So when we're walking to wherever we're going after this, you can walk there really fast and you'll get there fast, but you will have sort of upregulated a lot of your skeletal muscle system, and so you'll have used a lot of energy to get there really fast. And you can walk there really, really, really slowly, and it'll just take you, you'll be walking for a long period of time because you're walking so slowly, and that will take you a lot of energy to walk. So this is why I always tease my students that window shopping is actually very expensive, because if you're sauntering, then you're using a lot of energy to do that task. And so there is a speed at which energy is optimized to do a particular task, and it ends up around the world, most people choose to walk at this speed. So this tells us something not just about what's possible, but it gives us clues as to behavior, okay? There is the amount of energy that people are spending when they are walking at that optimal speed, and that energy is called the minimum cost of transport. And so that is just how much are you paying for doing the task that you're doing with food or other resources. And then the third variable of interest is the curvature itself. And so this is important to me because it ends up that when the bottom of the curve is more U-shaped, flatter, that essentially means that you can walk at any of these speeds. You can walk at any of these speeds and your cost of transport is identical. And so it gives you substantial flexibility in how you're going to do a task, because you can do a task at different speeds with no burden of energy. If you have a V-shaped cost of transport curve, then you're penalized every single time you make any decision but the energetically optimal decision. And this plays out in lots of different ways in terms of human behavior and in terms of how people maneuver with other humans. Okay, do you have a flexible cost of walking curve, or do you have sort of a more defined cost of walking curve that changes how you're able to relate to other people? Okay, so I guess I will also say that allometrically, for cost, for speed and cost, allometrically across organisms, humans tend to fall below the curve, below the line. So humans are actually very metabolically effective walkers. So for our mass, we walk pretty cheaply. Okay, so are humans similarly good at carrying loads? And so this is what we're going to talk about next. Okay, so these are studies that I have accomplished over the last 22 years of having people with the little mask walk in all sorts of different conditions, lab, out of lab, uphill, downhill, carrying things on their front, on their side, on their back, on their head, and thinking carefully about how people are carrying items that might be important to their livelihood to around the world. Carrying more than one thing, so things on your head and things on your back, et cetera, which is what most people do around the world. So it ends up that backloading is the cheapest way to carry something. And so you just have cost of transport here on the y-axis, and this is the unloaded baseline condition, front-loaded, side-loaded, backloaded, and backloaded has the lowest amount of cost that plays out in lots of other studies as well. Side-loaded is slightly more costly, and front-loaded is in between. It matters how much the load is. So the light blue is medium load, and this sort of, I don't know what that color feels like to you guys. Is green acceptable? Does green feel right? That's a large load. So back loads, when you're carrying a light load on your back, it's almost as if you're not carrying anything at all. The increase in cost is really, really small. And as we could talk about a little bit later, also your speed is maintained really nicely. Your cost does go up when it's heavy. For a side load, you can see that it doesn't really matter how much it weighs. As soon as you put something on your hip, it's going to cost you energy. And so side loads are always somewhat costly because you have a slight asymmetry to your gait. And then front load, which is how a lot of people around the world carry small creatures. They carry them on their stomach, on their torso. And so if it's light, that's not that big of a deal. But as soon as it becomes heavy, all of a sudden having a front load becomes a really big deal. Most of the reason this is because it's really hard to have like a regular leg extension if there's like a big thing right there. So front loading becomes really costly, which is why if it's an actual like small human that you're carrying, you're going to move that to your back as soon as it can stabilize its neck. It ends up that head load carrying is somewhat costly, but that's mostly because most people that I train to carry stuff on their head have to carry it with one arm. They can't balance the load completely on their head. And the moment you lose your arm swing, load carrying becomes quite expensive. The effectiveness of load carrying comes when it's on your back and your arm swing is free, which generally means that load carrying people are very good at load carrying when they have a tool to help them. And so here you have your unloaded condition. Here you have your little human with a back load. You can see there's barely any increase in cost. Here you have a person who's holding an empty bucket on their head, so they've lost one arm swing. And here you see the load from the back is now transferred to the head, and they've still lost the arm swing. And these are not significantly different from each other, but these are significantly different from each other. So it's all well and good to be loaded, but you have to maintain other aspects of your gait, namely a regular arm swing. However, even losing an arm swing, if you practice something, you always get better energetically. And so these are people who are carrying things on their head for the very first time. These are people who practiced and then came back to my lab to carry again. And the difference between the loaded, on the naive day and the loaded, the learned day are significantly different. And so the cost of carrying on the head and losing your arm swing is still better after you have practiced that more challenging task. There's not any difference between being unloaded. Okay, so in sum, humans are better than other mammals at carrying loads when they have a tool that allows them to maintain regular arm swing. And my definition of that is because any quadrupedal animal, let's just say a horse, if you were to put a burden on that horse, let's say you put 15% of the horse's mass on its back, its metabolic cost would increase exactly 15%. And so if any of you are fascinated and love locomotion, you could read a whole series of papers from the early 1980s about how every time you ask an animal, a non-human animal, a quadruped, to do something, its cost will always increase in proportional to the mass of the task that you've asked them to do. Not so with humans who are backloaded with a tool that allows them normal arm swing, and also front-loaded if the front load is small. If you put 16% of a person's mass on their body and allow them to maintain their arm swing, their metabolic cost of increase will only be 11 or 12%. So humans are able to do loading tasks that other quadrupeds cannot do and save substantial, those are Oreo worth, right? That is a lot of calories worth of savings that humans can have when they use a tool in order to maintain their gait and still carry something that is, multiple percentages of their mass. So humans are remarkably good at load carrying. We think this is true mostly because of how long we have had to carry loads. As soon as we become upright, we no longer have a horizontal surface for our babies to sit on. All primates carry their babies with them, and we see no reason to expect that early bipeds did not act like every other member of the primate order, which means you have to figure out how to carry juveniles, a required steady state universal. And so you're not going to be an excellent biped. Bipedalism is not going to be a successful mode of locomotion unless you can figure out how to get your little baby to all of the niches where you're going to go. We don't park our babies and leave them. We take them with us. That's actually a real thing. Parking your baby or letting your baby ride is what the term is. Additionally, by 2.6 million years ago, we have evidence of bipeds carrying raw materials tens of kilometers. So by 2.6 million, we have huge rocks getting from one part of East Africa to a different part of East Africa. So we know for at least 2.5 million years, we've not just been carrying these reproductive loads, we've also been carrying subsistence loads. So for these two reasons, we believe there's been strong selection pressure to allow hominids, bipeds, to carry other things efficiently, and we're very good at it. So how does being good at walking with loads translate into something like a division of labor? Okay, so anthropologists, broadly defined, and some sociologists generally agree that Homo sapiens divide labor. We think that for a variety of reasons. At the same time period, a little bit after that I just showed you that people are carrying raw materials really long distances, we see these bipeds doing a bunch of things simultaneously. They are hunting, though not with this. I just like this slide. You're going to see this picture a bunch. This is just the picture that means hunting, okay? Okay, so they're hunting, they have hearths, so they're cooking, and they're fishing, okay? So we, little bit of an argument, but I think most people would say that you have to have fish oils in order to grow big brains. You have to have cooking in order to gain access to nutrients at difficult seasons. And if you have the first access to certain kinds of skeletal meat or other kinds of nutrients from ungulates, then that's another source of nutrition that can allow for success and reproduction. And so by about 1.9 million years ago, we see evidence of this in all of these things in Africa amongst bipedal creatures. When we see the emergence of Homo sapiens, however, we build on that complexity of subsistence strategies dramatically. And in addition to hunting and fishing and cooking, we also have seasonal foraging of birds, very fast, very hard to catch. We also see dramatically diverse toolkits where tools are made of different materials from hundreds of kilometers away, not just tens of kilometers away. So raw materials and tools are traveling hundreds of kilometers, which is what this is. These are transport distances, hundreds of kilometers so that people, Homo sapiens, can make awls, needles, projectile technology. Now we do have, now this is real. Okay, and so the idea is that's a lot. That's a lot to do. That's a lot to make. That's a lot to manage If one person has to do all of these things, I mean, how do they have time for anything? And then if you add on top of this, at this time period when we have the emergence of Homo sapiens, we also have art. And now here's where things get crazy. We have hand-carved ivory beads, 3,000 of them. And someone hand-carved them and then put them in the ground and left them there. Who does that? Who has time to hand-carve 3,000 beads and then throw them away? Someone who has somebody else bringing them food. That's who has time to do that, right? And so the division of labor comes from there is so much happening that somebody has to be in charge of something like food because somebody else is sitting here like blowing paint on their hands and hand carving beads. Who has time for this? And so if we divide all of these tasks, who's making the nets, who's sewing, who's cooking, who's maintaining the tools, who's bringing us raw materials, if we divide the tasks, maybe we can explain how so many of them can get done. And one assemblage has evidence of all these things. Okay? And so how could we do this? We could divide tasks by age, and there's evidence for this. We could divide tasks by biological sex, and there's evidence for this. We could divide, by what you want to do, okay? By aptitude, by who is willing to sit and practice carving those ivory beads. Who wants to do that? That would be a reasonable way to divide tasks. You could just, you're the one sitting there, so maybe you're the one who's gonna do, maybe you're the one who happens to find ochre every time you find blueberries. So you're just gonna blow on your hand so that there's ochre on the wall because it was just convenient. What also often pops up in the literature is that there is an idea that maybe some tasks go well together. And so if some tasks go well together, maybe there are some individuals, again, you're still not discounting that it could be age or sex or aptitude, but there are some tasks that just go well together. And so maybe we're just going to loop things that could be together. Maybe that's how we're going to divide tasks. The people who want to do all these things can do them. And then where the rubber really hits the road, and I think we all know this, is that when it comes to multitasking, the real issue at play is if everyone is participating, what happens when someone is pregnant or lactating? What are the tasks that they can do all together, right? Because that's the conundrum that many people find themselves visiting. Maybe you can't do something because reproduction inhibits you from doing that, okay? And so now we have to see if that is a thing that could be happening. So the whole point of tools is to make it possible to multitask. So we see this explosion of diversity of toolkits, the explosion of tools. Do tools make it easier, for example, to do something when pregnant and lactating? So digging for tubers, is tubers potatoes? Yeah, are we happy with tubers? Okay, so digging with tubers is something that generally is considered pretty straightforward. Obviously, anyone who has dug in dirt knows that it's a give and a take. But there are incredibly ancient, very cool tools that are developed for digging tubers more effectively. Hundreds of thousands of years old. So we know that there are tools specifically for being better at digging tubers. And we also know that in humans today, people don't ever dig for tools without other individuals, including without individuals in a sling on their back so their hands are free. And there's no energetic difference. There's no difference in the amount of calories that are brought home after this digging. People can dig for tubers while they're multitasking, and there is a kid on their back. What about hunting? So the little thing that was in that picture that I said comes later is called an atlatl. And so an atlatl is a spear thrower. And so it's a tool into which you fit your spear and then you fling it. You flip your wrist and then your spear goes flying. Okay, so it's a very common tool. It occurs early and it occurs really widespread around the world. And so there's no difference between females in red and males in blue in the accuracy of throwing an atlatl, using an atlatl. There is no difference in the velocity at which the spear reaches when it's thrown with an atlatl between males and females. And if you have a kid on your back, there's no difference between your accuracy or your force production when you're using an atlatl. So there's nothing about at least having a kid on your back that is stopping you from foraging, because tools build in this flexibility. So that's culture. That's not biology. So this is important. It is important for humans to have this flexibility because humans have little tiny groups and the group composition changes and the mobility and seasons also change where humans are living. And remember, I'm interested in every day. Do you have food and water and safety every day? Okay, and so this is an example of the sex ratio of adults in a group of people who live in sort of 10 to 12 people groups in South America. And so you can see by the up and down of the line, of the solid line and the confidence intervals around the dotted line is even. So there are years in which there's only 2 males in the group. Years in which there are only a few females in the group. That is not a steady state activity that can be managed by only one person doing one task. How would you get food and water every day if the individual that you had assigned that job to is dead or has gone somewhere else, who has dispersed? Additionally, assuming that you don't die, people age. And aging can change aptitude, interest, curiosity, job. And we know that we have longer lifespans. So people leave, people die, people are born not at a 50-50 ratio if your tiny community has 12 people. And then we have to move seasonally. And ethnographic literature really shows that people take on different tasks at different seasons. And so even if it's your favorite task to do in the spring, you're probably going to do something else in the autumn. And so things like drives, things like hunting for birds and eggs, using canoes to gain access to certain aquatic resources, this happens on a seasonal basis. And so moving your jobs into different seasons is a typical part of most subsistence, small-scale subsistence communities. So if any of these tasks cost too much energy or leads to injuries, right? Those are like but being good. Maybe that would hurt reproduction, okay? So if the female can multitask, can carry something on her back and still do a task for not very much energy, that means we should be able to be pretty flexible in how we assign tasks within a community. So during load carrying, females have absolutely lower walking costs than males. And so this is one example of that. So again, we have speed on the x-axis and we have cost of transport on the y-axis, and the females are in green and the males are in blue, and the female line is significantly lower than the male curve. So females are using absolutely less energy to do this is a side carry, to do this side carrying loading task than males. This is cost per stride, and this is sort of a conversation to build upon maybe later today. But if you think really intentionally about the cost of locomotion, the cost of walking, we normally add up the cost it takes to take a stride. That's where most of our energy is coming from. And so you can see, again, females have a statistically significant lower cost of taking a step than males do. And this is true at all different. So this was a study where we had mass, like in a diving belt, mass carried on the shoulders, and then mass carried on the hip. And you can see this is the minimum cost of transport, which you remember. And at all conditions, females are significant. So it doesn't matter if the mass is closer to the center of mass or the mass is further away from the center of mass, okay? So if the mass is on the shoulders or the mass is on the hip, females always cost less. Okay, here's a little comparative biology for you. When we talk about why an organism, from an evolutionary perspective, why an organism might be big versus why an organism might be small, we compare and contrast ideas about economy, the total amount of energy you're using, and efficiency, the relative amount of energy that, did you guys take in like a comparative phys class? Is this sort of meaningful? Yeah. So in a given human population, females are on average smaller, on average, right? Which means that we actually should expect economy. We should expect that smaller creatures are using less energy, even if they're doing a really challenging task, like carrying a load, okay? We should then expect that males, the larger individual on average, should be more efficient, which means that they should be using less energy per kilo. So let's just do that together super fast before we go to some data. So this is a Cadillac. Let's pretend that it takes 1,000 joules and like a lot of really expensive gas, right, to drive. It's kind of like sad to look at the slide right now. No one can afford to drive a Cadillac right now. So 1,000 joules and 500 joules to drive the VW Bug, okay? But the Cadillac weighs 2,000 kilos, okay? And the Bug weighs 800 kilos. And so the ratio, the efficiency of the Cadillac is actually more efficient, right? It's only half a joule per kilo, whereas, oh, and this is a mouse lemur. Fun, a little mouse lemur. We were talking about that earlier. Okay, is 0.6 joules. The classic example of this is that if you have two 20-pound or like 20-kilo children, you have to feed them more food than one 40-kilo kid, right? Just because it is more expensive to have two little whole humans than like one slightly larger human, okay? So we should expect, so this you can see is just joules per meter. I haven't controlled for mass. So what you should expect, theoretically, is that the lines switch places when I divide. But you all know what's going to happen, of course. They should switch places, but of course they don't switch places. So in this particular study, which was people just carrying like just regular people carrying basic loads, they're equally efficient. So females are more economical and equally efficient to the males. And I should say they are significantly smaller, but everyone is carrying the same mass. Everyone in this study is carrying 11 kilos. So the females are doing relatively more work for less energy, absolutely, and at the equal efficiency. Okay, this really is like a physical miracle, and you should be very surprised. Okay, not the same as with other organisms. Additionally, in this particular study, I had women who had just given birth. And in this study, females were significantly more efficient than males postpartum, doing the same thing, carrying their baby on their front, the side, or their back. Males also carrying their baby on the front or the side or their back. So after pregnancy, females are not just equally efficient, more efficient than males doing the exact same task. So females also get to keep their economy to some extent and their speed when pregnant. And so these are unpublished data. They're currently under review. So here is speed, and there is cost of transport. So these are the curves that you've already seen. This blue curve is, so we live in a contraceptive using society. And so the blue line, these are all the same people as they go from thinking about getting pregnant and getting pregnant and all the way through their entire pregnancy until they gave birth. And so what is important for you to see right now is that, yes, so this is not pregnant, first trimester, second trimester, third trimester. So it does cost energy to be pregnant. Like, we're placental mammals. It's going to be like, you're going to have to like have more blueberries, okay? It costs energy to be pregnant. However, there is no significant difference in the speed at which is optimal, the optimal speed as you move through pregnancy. Okay. And so the ability to move distances in a particular amount of time remains consistent for females through pregnancy until the bitter, bitter end. Okay. Which again is a conversation for later. Okay. They get stronger legs. They have increased blood perfusion. I don't know if anyone's ever looked at the physiology, but their blood vessels are dilated, so blood flow is more effective to their skeletal muscle, and their left ventricle gets significantly bigger. So they are able to pump more blood quicker during pregnancy. And so all of these like ways of using and managing oxygen allows for locomotor advantages during pregnancy. Okay. So none of these tasks cost too much energy or time. Carrying loads in all these different positions, traveling long distances with a tool and your hands free, because female bodies are particularly good at carrying loads. They can also use tools, and that is literally the hallmark of being a human. So using tools to diversify subsistence, share, and learn are all things we should absolutely expect have been going on for thousands of years. So in sum, culture might divide labor, and we know that that is true, but biology remains flexible, and we have energetic strategies in relationship with intellectual capacity for being creative that could allow us to manage division of labor with things like aptitude, things like creativity. So what I'm going to do next is continue looking at walking. I mean, obviously, because I love it. I'm really interested in how different tools allow us to multitask more effectively. I'm interested in the interaction between load carrying and navigation. That's my passion right now. Oh, that's funny. Oh my goodness, that's so amazing. We're just going to enjoy this for a second. Sometimes when you press things on PowerPoint, it just does amazing things. One of the things I'm doing right now is I'm sending people out into the wilderness. This is my metabolic system on their bodies, and I'm sending them out via different methods. So I'm sending them on water, I'm sending them through different terrestrial environments, and I'm having them do that with no information, some information, a physical map, and I'm trying to figure out which strategy allows them to navigate most efficiently, and that is both a measure of how quickly they can do first or second navigation, and then how much energy they use to do those tasks. So this is what I'm working on next. And these are all my people. So thank you so much for inviting me and listening to me, and I hope that you are curious now about human locomotion too. Yeah.
So I'm gonna run the microphone around people so that question on Zoom.
Oh. And are we gonna toggle back and forth?
No, just turn it on.
Turn this off.
Yes.
Okay, off.
It's off. The room microphone should work.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay.
Thank you very much. That was really great talk. I think I'm most curious as someone who does, is honestly generally not interested in myself in studying humans really. And so I lack a lot of knowledge, especially in the space of like study design. And one of my biggest questions was, what sort of sample sizes and diversity of people are we working with here?
Yeah.
Because when it's like, and I know you didn't do the out loud study, but I'm just like, is that just like one guy throwing out loud and they're putting a data on his back? And how many people can, be adding data to that? But obviously after that, but for some of the walking studies, like how are you selecting or getting people for your data collection, and how diverse is that pool of people?
A couple of things. Randy Haas at Wyoming in Laramie, which we were talking about earlier today. He studies adult driving, and he has reasonable samples. In the tens for some studies, in the 20s for other studies. He teaches people. He also goes to South America where there are still adult using communities. He's an archaeologist who integrates practical archaeology to try to explain some of the patterns he sees in his assemblages. And his samples that I have seen, except when he goes to other places, and then it's just people who have been using different kinds of projectile technology. There's also a sling that's really popular in South America. So he has studied actually 50s of people doing this sling. Normally he studies university aged people in their 20s as a general rule. So let's see. The studies I showed from 2017 of the optimal walking curves of people carrying loads in 3 different positions. Those were people from I'm gonna say 19 to 50 years old. I have collected data on hundreds of people carrying loads from all over. When I use acute studies, so I'm putting loads on and taking loads off, putting loads on and taking loads off. Usually those are people in their 20s. When I'm studying reproductive aged people, so people who have are going through pregnancy, who have had their own babies, those studies usually that's 30 to 45. So it depends a little bit. And I think that, and also I guess I did cite my own studies because I was invited. But I will say that when I especially my work on curvature that I developed with my colleague Rusty Myers, that has actually been taken by numerous labs, and they have replicated these studies literally all over the world. So you can find studies looking at curvature and load carrying in lots of different in children, in adults, in the elderly, all over the world, and it seems to hold up pretty well. So yeah, I mean,
So like when you get the pregnancy curve, are
Yeah.
you like asking people, are you not interested in kids? And then like giving them
Oh.
this like
no, I sent out a message and I did some recruiting and I said, are you trying to get pregnant? And then they came, and so the final sample was not the same amount of people who came initially.
sure.
Right.
Yeah,
But yes, I was like, and that's the thing about like being in a big city, where people sort of make an executive decision to go off of birth control and decide to try getting pregnant. And so those were so I waited because as some of you might know, it takes some months to like switch your cycles. And so these people all got pregnant between 1 and 3 months after they did my initial read of their metabolism. Yeah, and then I was the first person who knew. Because they're like, we're not telling anybody, but you need us, right? It's like, I need you at your first missed period. Like, I need you right away. And so I had them all like right away between 4 and 6 weeks. And so yeah, it was pretty, but it's pretty good. So yeah. And I think that I think your question like gets to another like underlying. I started looking at load carrying in 2004. And making an argument that I thought for the human universal aspect, I thought in 2004 that female bodies were going to be better because every single place in the world has females carrying stuff. But nobody believed me for a long time. And so I think the thing that is persuasive is that I've collected over and over and over and published study after study after study. And so I do think, I mean, it's a paradigm, right? And so paradigms take a long time to change. And it does make a difference if I'm looking at, and so I didn't show it today, but I have another study of people going up and down stairs with and without loads. And in that sample, it's a sample, so it's about 25 or 30 people, but there is no sex difference in stature and mass. Because it's just like it's a sample, right? And there's so much overlap in like human that's one of the reasons I'm an anthropologist, is because like what? We're so phenotypically diverse, it's amazing. And females still did a really good job. And so that's why I knew to stop just looking at economy and try to look at efficiency. And so there's a bunch of different things at play that I didn't get to talk about because this is more very like mechanistic talk.
Yeah.
But blood perfusion is a big thing. Longer stride length is a big thing. There's just a ton of like interesting interactive things. And these differences really do tend to pop when they're carrying loads. And that is mostly because on average, female bodies tend to have lower center of mass. And so that's the stability of the not falling over as easily. So there are some cool things about that. But this is the most important question. Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. Actually, no, go for it.
I have 2 questions. How many am I allowed to ask?
I don't know, it's 5 o'clock. I don't know who people are.
I think they're really space so we can think of.
Okay. My first question is, have you or anyone else looked at how disability alters the cost of load carrying?
Tell me a little bit more about what you think about that. So like load carrying with extra tools.
Yes,
like
tripod
tripod or yeah.
But
So I have a grant with the VA right now to look at load carrying in people who have a variety of post-cranial just differences. So different kinds of feet are one of the things we're looking at, but also my dream is to look at double amputees. Like that is like if someone would please sort of like help me move into that space. I've collaborated briefly with a lab in Colorado, but they're much more interested in running than load carrying. And so I can't think of anybody off the top of my head. People have looked at dragging, and then like dragging loads rather than carrying loads and pushing loads, but I can't think of any particular like gait asymmetries. So that would definitely be something that would be worth investigating. Yeah, but normally when you have different kinds of tools, especially different kinds of carrying tools, then normally it's an endurance question, whether or not you can carry for longer.
And that was just, what's the variation in performance? Because we saw like the average, but you know, how much does this vary? Like, I'm assuming that, the speed, whatever optimal speed, per cost, like varies a lot, especially based on leg length and height and other things, yeah.
Okay, so a couple of different things. Let me see if I can get at this well. So people do have an individual optimal curve, right? For both walking and for running. And the shape of that curve varies based on quite a few things. It is based on stature, mass, limb length, pelvis width, of course. And most of those things, but in like sort of the grand scheme of the world, people who are smaller have a much broader base to the optimal walking curve, and people who are bigger have a much more acute base to the optimal walking curve. Which generally means that, and so people who have a more acute, as I said already, I think a more acute base to the optimal walking curve, when you compare and contrast what you ask them to do with their energetic optimum, they will always choose pretty much exactly their optimal walking speed. Whereas people who are smaller, who have a much more U-shaped bottom to their optimal walking curve, they will usually choose something a little bit slower, especially if they're loaded. And that is because the energetic cost is not significantly different, but the heat load is significantly different. And I didn't get to talk about thermoregulation, but for some of these studies, they also have like an internal core sensor that's monitoring their core body heat while they're doing all these different tasks. And so we will also see that if energy is even, people will then choose, especially when they're load carrying, to minimize their energetic burden to make that delta temperature smaller. So that would be an individual effect that I would generally see. That will change some of these sort of whole population. Do you have another like specific example that you're thinking about? Like
Like for variation, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm exactly thinking about like variation with Indian.
yeah,
Yeah, like I saw it was about 1.3 meters per second, right?
Yeah.
So like, I don't think we're all walking at 1.3 meters per second, you know?
Yeah.
I've walked next to some of you.
Yeah.
You know?
I actually have a study about that. It's really fun actually to see what people, and so culture actually will, if you're walking in community, culture almost always wins. And that is like one of my favorite things about being a biological anthropologist. And like how close you feel to a person will also change. So that's an advantage for small people with relatively broader pelvises because they have the broadest base to the cost of transport curve. So you can choose to walk with, so a person who has that curve can choose to walk at any speed, really, and they won't burn any more calories, which from an evolutionary perspective is what we want. I know it might, like, anyways, that's normally what we want. And so, but yes, the individual differences between behavior can be fun and delightful. And usually there's just a cultural, so yes, taller people have longer stride lengths, so they tend to walk at a slightly faster optimal speed. But then if they're walking with somebody else, they will make a decision actually usually based on if they want to sort of like gently bump into the person with whom they're walking or whatever it may be. And then they will like slow down and things like that. So.
If you like had to estimate though, like what would be the range of walking speeds?
So I actually, this is really embarrassing, but I don't think I have it in meters per second off the top of my head. So in miles per hour, I'm so sorry for saying this out loud. I talk about science. But as a general rule in miles per hour, it's 2.6 to 3.2. Yeah, miles per hour. So.
That's like maybe for helpful, because like that's what it measures on a treadmill, so you can just say.
Yeah, 3 miles per hour at like a 1% incline, right? Because the treadmill is so slow. But that's usually about what it is for people. But yeah, it'll be sort of 2.6. And you can get all the way up to 3.4 if you're like really tall. But that's pretty unusual. And then 4, so 2 meters per second and 4 miles an hour is usually somewhere around the walk position. So that's way too fast. That's like way up high. So yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering, so I watch a lot of rock climbing, and there's like a big thing. It is like such like a morphology and like strength-based sport.
Yeah.
But like they're seeing a lot of like the female rock climbers often outperforming like male rock climbers on like male designed rock climbs. And so there's like an argument about like we should just combine them. They're obviously doing just as good or if not better than men.
The same ultras.
Yeah, so is this like a good argument for just like getting rid of the like sex-based division?
So usually if the issue is endurance, and like route picking, things like that, then usually it is pretty even Stevens. So the interesting thing about, I'm trying to think if there's another one on top of, and well, like anything with tools, right? Like, so horseback riding, my daughter is a fencer, it tends to be pretty even. So the thing about rock climbing is that females, so usually they use a slightly different climbing strategy, however, they tend to be very light. But on average, females have stronger glute muscles than males. That's one of the ways we get our lower center of mass, is that there's just more musculature lower versus in males musculature higher. So I have a paper on this if you're interested, because this is like when you like do DEXAs, this is like a real thing that comes to the surface. So females tend to like jump and use their lower body strength to get them to the next hook. And they're also on average lighter. And so those two things combined, and instead of like when you have a huge amount of upper body strength, you're muscling up. And so they're just slightly different strategies. Both strategies are effective and fast. And that's usually what you're doing in like competitive rock climbing, is you're just trying to get to the top as fast as possible. Both of these strategies have the potential to be very fast. So yeah, I think they're all, I mean, my collaborator and I argue about this a little bit about how competitions should run. I think that there is a potential is for there to be more competitions together, but there are reasons that I think that's true, that maybe it would be better just like in the house. So women female bodies are doing a lot of things now with nutrition and health and training that they weren't allowed to do 4 years ago. And I think that matters. So you're seeing larger deltas in improvement in female athletes than in male athletes right now, because training matters, food matters, practice matters, puberty matters. And so yeah, I think we'll get to some goals for sure.
I have two. One is more like a comment and a question. I think in attention to what Russell said earlier, that I was watching a video the other day, and they mentioned how there's a certain age in which young kids, like, they jump everywhere, just move by jumping.
Yes, that's right.
There's like an optimal.
Why is skipping not everyone's favorite gait? We all want to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
because we're too big.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
like an optimum place. I wonder if this applies to other types of locomotion as well, as we get older, perhaps,
Yeah,
we're runners, then walkers, or vice
Yeah.
versa.
yeah. Well, we're not awesome runners. So it's a game we choose to do for a variety of reasons, but we're not, and that's, I mean, especially when you compare us with other creatures, we're not great runners. I mean, you can do anything you want because you're human, you have free will. When this is gonna be horses. Okay. When horses change gait, okay, so this is a walk. And this is a trot. And this is a canter. Okay. Or this is the canter and this is the gallop, something like that, but it's okay, it doesn't matter for the point of my point of my thing. What do you notice?
Same process.
It is, that's right. The minimum is always the same. So as soon as they change gait to save energy, okay, they change gait to save energy. Can I erase it? Is that okay? Okay. Now, it's true that children skip, and that's amazing. They're low to the ground and their center of mass is low, and they're light, so they do all sorts of things. Adult humans generally have 2 gaits, walking and running, okay? So, this is our walking gait. Okay. Okay. This is our running gait. Okay. We are super rubbish runners. And so this is actually one of the reasons that load carrying is so remarkable, because in everything else, we have this huge difference between our ability to switch gaits and other organisms' ability to switch gaits. But as long as we have arm swing, then this is like the only, sorry, it's not that big. The only thing that happens when we add a load is that we go like that. That's it. It's like this teeny tiny little shift. So, but I mean, you can run for lots of reasons. And I have I think about that a lot. I have a lot of papers about that. You can feel good for other reasons. You don't need endorphins. I'm serious. You get endorphins from lots of anything that's hard, right? Anything that's hard will give you endorphins. It's not just running. Running is weirdly hard. But you can get it through other routes. What was your second thing?
The second thing is, I was thinking about different types of activities that humans do, and walking can be a lot of things. So you could walk from here to, you could walk here at home, but you could also migrate by walking.
Yeah,
And-
that's why I'm interested in navigation. So
Yeah.
true.
So I guess the longer you walk, your source of energy could also change. Perhaps at
Yes.
first you're using
Yes.
oxygen and then you switch.
Yes.
And I wonder how that affect your cost equation.
Yeah, I love that question. That's actually, so it has been done by the military. It's very hard to get access to that report, but you can technically find it. I haven't read it lately, but there is definitely idea more than like absolute calories that you're using or absolute joules. You just toggle between different substrates, right? And so you start with lean mass, and then, well, it depends a little bit on if you're fed or not, but you can start with protein or lean mass, and then you're just gonna burn all your sugars, and then you're gonna go into your protein, and then you're gonna go into your fat. And so, but as a general rule, the calories themselves stay the same. Your thermoregulation changes. And so that's why, you're always sort of in collaboration between those two variables. But because the military data is kind of hard to get, that's actually, I would really like to do that. I would like to just have people walk for a couple of hours with some things and just see what happens. See if you can track their stuff, of course, always fasting, see if you can track how they move between substrates easily or not, and then what the sort of overall burden is. I do think that the stability is gonna end up, again, at some point when fatigue sets in, then you fall. And so you want to really want to protect. There's a really great paper that you might love by a guy named George Brill, and he's a PhD student. And I think it's 2024, It might be 2025, and it's in one of the Royal Society journals. And it is one of my favorite papers right now, and it is all about all of the different ways that people move everywhere. So it's walking and running and dancing and swimming and canoeing. And he looks at how people do these different activities, the portion of the day that people do all these activities all over the world. And it's just a really satisfying paper because people do different things. Everybody walks every day, but again, cute things like dancing as part of rituals is a super important part of social cohesion. And I think has made giant contributions to how we manage things over our history. And I think it is really worth understanding and just talking about more for sure.
I'm sorry, I know we're over time, but that graph makes sense to me based on like being a human in the world and existing.
Yeah.
But I know like all the anthropologists.
No, they don't.
Many anthropologists have said like for a long time.
Since
that, like,
2004.
Since 2004, that like running made us human, and running and endurance, we're so good at running and chasing the gazelle, and that's why we're so good at what we do. So what's up with that?
Yeah, that's the power of the Harvard political machine, which as graduate students all understand. That is a really pretty just so story about a couple of people in a couple of places from time to time. So I liken it to the difference between what you're eating right now and what you eat at Christmas or Thanksgiving or whatever like holiday in your life where you feast. Do you all have a feasting holiday? No. So that hypothesis is called the endurance running hypothesis. And they make multiple claims. I have a whole talk about it actually that actually exists somewhere, I think, online. So one of their let's see, their claims would be that humans use persistence hunting regularly in order to acquire necessary meat resources. Okay, so just at face value, in the very few communities where people use endurance running, it's mostly walking. Only 1 or 2 members of the group do it, and they only do it a couple times a year. So this is exactly the reason that I said I am not that interested in like acute things that 1 or 2 members of your community do from time to time, because I just don't think it's going to have as giant an impact on our bodies, on selection pressures as things that we do every single day. But I mean, people do care about acute things. So does it matter for your vision of how selection works that a couple of days a year, a couple of guys go out and do a walk run? Because those are the data underlying their narrative. And you can read those papers. If the papers on which they base their really pretty story, that's what it's based on. But, and this is, I was saying this to somebody earlier. People like to run. People like to dance. People like to go camping, right? My daughter is an Olympic fencer. I don't think she evolved to do that. But when she wakes up every morning, she's like, I want to go fencing. Like, it's okay to love things that we didn't evolve to do. Right? Oh, we talked about that earlier. Yeah. And so Dan Lieberman, the author of this narrative, he loves to run. He runs the Boston Marathon and gives a little lecture there every year. And I'm so happy that he loves to run, happy that he gives this lecture. I do not think it has a meaningful impact on human evolution because not everybody does it. And even the people who do it do not do it very regularly. So. I can't think of any other like, and I guess I would also say. In their narrative, they list a series of characteristics of morphology and physiology that are only described by running, and none of those play out. So walking up hills, again, doing like labor. So if you want to talk about an endorphin rush, like go through labor. Like that's so many endorphins. You feel amazing at the end because it's hard. Right? And so hard things result in endorphins. You could, in fact, there is a paper that's about to come out in the next week or so in Anatomical Record that makes the claim that all of the happy hormones, the elastic ligaments, all of the things that you're arguing for running are actually just explained by being a bipedal pregnant person. It's not my paper. So I'm like, I can freely advertise it. And so the idea of being like an endurance athlete does not require running at all. You can do it and love it. But it's not like you don't need some sort of like special creation to explain where that would have come. But you're right. It is a narrative that exists in textbooks, which means I can't use textbooks in any of my intro classes. My students read papers, so
Never made sense to me.
yeah. Yeah, I still have the most vivid memory as a postdoc when that paper came out. And I just like, we had an immediate lab meeting to like talk about what we were gonna do about this crazy, because it's the front page of Nature. Like, what do you do with that? So I designed the study that showed that walking is really ineffective for POS. So that was the first thing I did. It's data.
All right, I think it's time that we are. So we're gonna walk over to McMenamin.
I'm gonna run.
You escaped as many calories.
You can have another here. Yeah, so just a heads up, we have some budget for buying appetizers, but we're not allowed to buy alcohol. So you're gonna have to buy your own drinks. But we're gonna have a nice time there, and yeah.
Is it okay if I?
Yes. Okay.
Okay, you're good. Okay.
No?
Yeah.